ever seen this picture? The backstory is pretty twisted as it involves an apparent experiment that took place back in the 1940s that ended up shocking the entire internet and still sits with people today who need explanations. But did the cruel sleep experiment that the Soviets were blamed for actually have factual backing? Or was it a simple story to keep the internet wondering? Let's dive into this virally insane experiment and find out. The date is August 8th, 2009. A WordPress blog site called Rip's Domain posted an interesting story called The Russian Sleep Experiment. The site owner claimed his brother sent him an email with tales of a gruesome and cruel experiment with these authentic looking photos to support it. It involved 5 Russian political prisoners who were considered enemies of the state that had to undergo one of the worst experiments imaginable, discovering the after effects of unnaturally long sleep deprivation. The email's claims goes as told. It's 1940. Russian researchers wanted to take on a new experiment involving 5 inmates with the promise that after 30 days of undergoing said experiment, they would be released. The prisoners gladly took this on as they were all keen on a full pardon. They were then placed in a room that was sealed containing microphones, 5-inch thick glass, porthole sized windows for researchers, beds to sleep without bedding, running water and a single toilet. Books were also included for prisoners' entertainment. An experimental stimulant gas was leaked into the air within the room to the knowledge of the prisoners to prevent them from sleep. The first 5 days were normal with minimal complaining, but after those 5 days paranoia began to set in due to the lack of sleep, which would lead to the events this experiment was famous for. The prisoners eventually stopped talking to each other and instead started talking into the microphones, ranting about gaining trust of their captors. After 9 days, one prisoner started screaming and running around the length of the room for hours on end. Interestingly, the other prisoners never reacted to it. By day 14, the researchers prompted over the speakers that they would open the sealed room to try get a reaction, but the only thing they heard on the microphone was, "We no longer want to be freed." Day 15 arrives and the researchers are desperate to know what's going on, so they decided to flush the whole room of gas and enter. Unfortunately, what they saw was beyond comprehension. The food had mainly been untouched. 4 prisoners remained, with one sadly ripped into pieces within the room. The remaining were all barely recognizable. Large portions of their muscles and skin had been torn from their body, abdominal organs below the ribcage removed and laying across the room, still operating as the organs were attached to the prisoners. The dead prisoner himself, well, he had digested himself to death, while the other prisoners were still eating off their own bodies. All the 4 prisoners wanted was the gas to be turned back on and be left in peace. It is believed that some sort of demonic possession took over these prisoners due to the lack of sleep, and the only terrifying picture ever taken haunts web users to this day. In October of 2012, the story was submitted to the WTF subreddit, and another year later, the YouTuber I Read Creepypastas ultimately made it what it is today by telling the grim story in a video, ultimately gaining 34 million views. Now, in order to debunk the Russian sleep experiment, we need to take a look at the evidence surrounding it. Unfortunately, this is the internet, so words cannot be fact. So we're going to start with the photographs first. As it seems, it hasn't taken me much digging to find out our beloved, sleep-deprived, flesh-rotting, demonic creature is actually a Halloween prop. Spasm is made by Morbid Enterprises that had its image photoshopped, it seemed, to look real to give more genuine aesthetics to the post. As for the image of the chamber shown, it's nothing but an artistic illustration according to major news sources who have consulted experts on it. Now, where does the famous picture of the 4 men who were the apparent subjects actually come from? Well, a quick Google image search gives us that exact information. It's only men from an unknown date modelling World War I gas masks. None which is Soviet. From the left is an American, a British, a French, lastly a German style outfit. The other images are from unknown sources, but knowing the backstory on the others, we know they are pulled from random corners of the internet. Po Chung-Hesu, an international medicine physician expert at Sleeping Oceans, stated some drugs and high caffeine dosages will give a couple of days without sleep, but the 30-day bar set for the Russian sleep experiment would have been merely impossible. So we know the apparent Soviet sleep experiment lasted up to 15 days and left the participants or prisoners in a right state. But the current Guinness World Record achieved by Robert McDonald is 19 days long. And that dude, I'm telling you, is very much alive and certainly not digesting himself. Previously, the record was held by Randy Gardner. Randy recorded everything with a team around him as he wanted to prove nothing extremely bad would happen to a person when they don't sleep. Though it was recorded he had experienced mood swings, memory issues, hallucinations, and paranoia, but nothing demonic that would lead someone to tear their own flesh nor remove their innards. Moving back to the war times, amphetamines have been known to be used on soldiers to keep them alert and awake while out there on the battlefield. But this apparent Soviet experimental gas that was used to keep these prisoners awake has never ever been recorded in factual history from any wartime or any time at all. I'll give you guys all the money in my bank account if any one of you can come up with factual backing that claims that this Soviet gas exists that keeps people awake as long as 15 days or more. Famous debunking website Snoops also explained that the Russian sleep experiment was a myth and not to trust everything you see and hear. In the end, the Russian sleep experiment is creative writing at its best and makes for a great internet creepypasta that will live on for generations to come. Funny enough, a friend actually mentioned this to me the other day, wondering if the Russian sleep experiment was real or not, which actually prompted me to make this episode. So yeah, that's proof enough that this little story has been sitting with people even today. The experiment did have some medical backing with the whole paranoia and hallucinations from the lack of sleep, but this was just added to make realism to the story, and to make it more believable, of course. That, and of course I will say again, the experimental gas just didn't exist. On top of that, experts have deemed the experiment impossible, concluding the Russian sleep experiment as, of course, officially debunked. A great internet horror story, of course, that does come up from time to time. Sorry, yeah, I was literally like trying to get ready to go out and stuff. I've got friends waiting outside, so I had to quickly finish this episode off. Anyway, thanks.
Hello everybody, Haunt Former here, back again to do a review of Spasm. He's an animated prop made out of latex foam, I believe. He stands about maybe 2.5 feet tall.